the case for religious phenomenology. All right. So Jackie, give us the case for religious phenomenology.
Okay. First of all, before I make my case, I just wanted to check on how have you been after giving birth?
Oh, that's so sweet of you. I've been doing all right. Everything's, recovering as it should. The baby is super cool. And she, she actually doesn't cry as much as I almost feel like she should. And it's interesting because this is totally silly, right? But I was thinking that, the parents of psychopaths and sociopaths always say that their babies didn't cry very much. And so I'm kind of like, you could cry more, actually. Like, she's too easy of a baby, if that makes sense. But yeah,
that's a specific lens to view that, Sophia, that I feel like only you would have.
My brain is a very strange place.
I don't think you can extrapolate like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I just am being a little silly about it. It's been really exciting to watch my son become an older brother also, and he's very cute with the baby, and that's really great. So yeah, been really enjoying it. That's incredibly sweet of you to ask. So thank you.
So yeah, I basically wanted to present the case for religious phenomenology because, are you guys familiar with the term continental philosophy?
Yes.
I'm not actually. You want to go ahead and give us a summary of that one?
So basically, continental philosophy is philosophy from mainland Europe, so Europe other than the UK and Ireland. And basically, I tend to notice a lot of atheists who are publicly advocate for atheism are not generally familiar with it, or most people don't have that type of mindset. So it includes things like phenomenology, existentialism, German idealism, psychoanalysis, and other movements. And I tend to notice that in the debates about religion, a lot of it goes on to like propositional logic and with more what's called the analytic style of philosophy, or philosophy from America and Europe. And I think that's a flaw because it is a major part of the philosophical component that I don't think it's talked about enough. But anyway, it's sort of tangentially related to the point. So are either of you guys familiar with the cognitive scientist John Vervaeke?
I
would just point out that analytic traditions and continental traditions are both Western. I don't know why you'd make the distinction between them being like one particular parts in America and different parts in Europe. But yeah, they're definitely both Western traditions of philosophy and a categorically flawed understanding or categorically flawed sort of way in which to view philosophy, but they can be broadly useful. But yeah, I can concede to your point that yeah, there is a particular lens in which some atheists will look at the structure of arguments that may be problematic under some views of philosophy. But to your other question, no, I'm not familiar.
So basically, John Vervaeke is a cognitive scientist in Canada. He identifies as a non-theist, which I disagree with, but he basically talks about the case for the problem with atheism lacking the ability to recognize spiritual and religious understandings of ontology and mysticism being properly construed not as some new age woo-woo stuff, but a genuine ontology, and how participatory engagement with spirituality in a religious sense transforms people. Or are either of you guys familiar with Jordan Peterson?
Yes. I think we can start maybe with the point you just made, actually, if that's all right. Because so the premise there, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that atheists are not addressing the fact that religious experience changes people. Is that correct?
Maybe, but it's more kind of an oversimplification. I think a better way to say it is they don't seem to engage with the more essential aspects of the relation between cognition and transcendence, if that makes sense.
Like what?
Like how relation to the transcendence or influences people's decision making, how the transcendent it affects our subconscious, our psyche, or collective unconscious, using Carl Jung's terms, and how participation in these reenactments of ritual experiences allows us to tap into that aspect of ourselves.
I mean, I don't. So what is this a guy's opinion, or is this research that he's done that says, oh, atheists don't do this? Because it sounds like this is some guy's opinion. If this is some guy's opinion, I'm happy to say that, yeah, I recognize that people's understanding of their beliefs and their system of beliefs affect their social framework, affect their identity. I mean, we were just talking about that in our previous call. It definitely affects their worldview and how they operate in the world. I don't know why me as an atheist means I lack an understanding of that.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious specifically,
I mean, I'm not. I don't. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm curious specifically because I'm kind of still trying to get my brain a little bit around what it is I'm supposed to be answering here. I think sometimes we get a little lost in jargon, and I think that might have happened here to me. So I'm looking at you said essential aspect between cognition, and it sounds like kind of a more spiritual experience and the ability to have like a subconscious and the other components of our brain.
So are either of you guys generally familiar with phenomenology, like Martin Heidegger, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Karl Jaspers, or the other ones?
Yes, German phenomenology with Heidegger, yes. Later stuff, not as much, but mostly, yeah.
The way I would say it is, it's sort of like Jordan Peterson talks about like this. When you see a cup, why do you see a cup? Well, because that cup provides you water. And why is that water valuable? Because it helps you live. And why is living valuable? And you can go on and on with an infinite regress of perception. And so basically the phenomenological interpretation of meaning in a religious sense is that whatever sits at the pinnacle of the infinite regress of reasoning for living and for motivation is in the, you could say, religious phenomenological domain. And I would also argue using how Jordan Peterson talks about using Carl Jung's that analytic psychology, that there's aspects of our subconscious with a priori archetypes that we motivate to as a human being that we describe in religious language.
Yeah. So Jackie, do you think 99% of Christians understand their relationship with God that way?
I mean, what do you mean?
How about 95% or 90%? Do you think any of them are using that language to describe their relationship with God or their relationship with Christianity as a theological system, right? I don't think most people are, is my point. I think these are particular people who study phenomenology and who write papers about this stuff. I don't think that's the world I grew up in as a Christian, and I don't think most people grew up as. So I to be honest, I don't really care, right? Like what I'm interested in is mostly the power dynamics that Christianity brings, but also like the real world experience that Christianity brings. I mean, we can talk about it in this grand philosophical sense of the regress of perception and what have you. But why is that meaningful to me? It's not. Like I can engage in this conversation all day, but like what's the point? What am I going to get out of that? And what are most Christians going to get out of that even?
Well, the meaningfulness here is, the question is, are there meta-narratives, and are those meta-narratives what we would describe as religious or eternal? So, like, say, Nietzsche,
I mean, that's a separate question from everything you've just described. But sure, go ahead.
I'm going to explain. I'm getting there, please.
Okay.
So the reason it can, the overlap here is some of the existentialists, like Nietzsche, Jean-Paul Sartre, we're talking about, okay, existence precedes essence. We are not born with a priority values, and we have to make meaning in our life. And we should also distinguish between Nietzsche and Sartre. I don't think they were the same, but essentially it's rejection of eternal values. The reason this is fundamentally wrong is
that's
okay.
Well, all right, go on. I have a critique of your interpretation of Nietzsche and Sartre, but yeah, go ahead, keep going.
And we are born with a priority values in our consciousness and how we perceive the world, right? And I would say, so Carl Jung analyzed religion in his Red Book. When people construct meta-narratives, it's not to oppress people, sort of like a Deleuze or Foucault talks about postmodernism, right? Power structures oppress. No, the meta-narrative there is not one of exploitation. You need a meta-narrative in order to live and have motivation, but that meta-narrative is not internal, it's relational. And the relational is between your cognition and how you experience the world around you in a social context.
Okay. So I'm going to pause you there because I think we've reached back to the idea of phenomenology, which I think, okay, we've made this circle. I think, actually, you want to start, Dan? I'm going to clarify my thoughts real quick.
Okay, sure. Deleuze and Foucault talk about their postmodern understanding of power dynamics can involve a different understanding of meta narratives. Actually, they're the ones that are interested in meta narratives. I don't think Sartre or Nietzsche talk about meta narratives. So I don't, you're throwing a lot of the stuff around here. Well, let me.
I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't think that they're super related, and I'm kind of losing track of what point we're trying to get at here. I can engage in all of these ideas. I don't know what is the point. What am I missing here? What am I as an atheist sort of not getting at? Because I don't recognize that there's a contextual relationship with the transcendental with religious people that I somehow don't have. Okay,
so I'm going to jump in right there real quick because to address meta-narratives, I think we've started with a fundamental, what I would say is a misunderstanding of the idea of a meta-narrative. It is not my belief in this and how we discuss this, that they start as a top-down thing, like we're given a meta-narrative from an authority and then we just go forward. I believe, and I think that this is fairly well borne out, that meta-narratives are the product of culture. And so even the phrase that they're not constructed to oppress, well, they're not really constructed consciously. There's something that arise organically out of cultures around them. When you're talking about phenomenology, and I've been looking it up kind of as we're talking, that's referring, I'm going to finish what I'm saying, that's referring to how we interpret the experience that we're having, right? Like our understanding of the phenomena that we are experiencing. And so meta-narratives would impact our understanding of the phenomena that we're experiencing. I can see that connection that I feel like you're trying to make. In an odd way, though, I would argue that this is almost making an argument for atheism or for lack of need for a God to interpret these things for us. If we're thinking about how we experience the world, and that comes from a meta-narrative that really is more culturally dependent, then why would we need something to tell us what why would we need a prescribed meta-narrative? I think it makes a lot more sense to think that, yes, our culture and our context determines what we see. Going back to the Jordan Peterson example about the cup, that's sort of a bizarre one to start with as an example of phenomenology. He says we see the cup because we drink out of it. I would say we see the cup because it's advantageous for us to be able to see the cup, that our eyes, which developed over millions and millions of years, are able to perceive food sources because that was advantageous for us over time, and water sources and all of that. It's not to interpret that as divorced from, I would say here, evolution and the evolution of our species would be to misinterpret it. We don't see the cup because we feel like a cup should be there because we want water. We see the cup because it's advantageous for us to be able to see that cup. So applying that to religion, if we're thinking about a meta-narrative, if we're thinking about these stories that we live by that come from our culture, we see a God maybe because we need to see a God, because we want to see a God, because it makes us feel better. Nothing in anything I've heard makes an argument for anything eternal other than the assertion that something eternal is there. Does any of that make sense?
Yeah, I think maybe you misunderstood my point about postmodernism. My point was that sort of atheistic postmodern view is that power meta-narratives are constructed in power relations to oppress.
I said I don't think that's true at all. So at least it's not this atheist view.
That's what Deleuze and Foucault talk about that. Yes. Okay. I don't know if that's
about me as a modern atheist.
Yeah, the regular average Joe atheist. I think that's for postmodern schools of thought. But yeah.
So are you wanting me to argue on behalf of Foucault?
Yeah, I'd like to know this too. Like, what do you want from us? Like, what are we lacking here that we need to understand?
Well, the main thing is, so the claim is a meta-narrative constructed or not constructed? Is it developed, you could say? Is it processed culturally? Well, you can say when a meta-narrative is adopted, you can say that you make a choice to adopt it, but there are certainly some meta-narratives which are more true than other meta-narratives, and the reason you know some meta-narratives are true more than other meta-narratives is because the prescription for a modality of being have, in certain circumstances, been more advantageous than others. Like,
oh yeah, I'm always saying this, dude. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm always saying this. Yeah, 100%. Sorry, I'm not meaning to be dismissive, but what the fuck are we talking about here? Like, okay, I'm not arguing that more meta narratives are truer than other narratives. First of all, I don't agree with that, but also like, why does this pertain to us? Like, what do you argue? What is the position that we allegedly hold that you say that we hold? Like, you seem to work under some sort of assumption that we're operating under, and I'd be curious, because maybe you read our minds, or maybe you've heard Sofia's thesis on Foucault and power dynamics that I know that she's written about and has talked extensively about on Talk Heathen before. Like, what are we talking about here?
I'm just saying that if the Judeo-Christian meta-narrative that I would say has broadly influenced the collective psyche of the West is more true than other meta-narratives, right? Because
okay, all right, there we go.
Okay.
Awesome. See, well, I disagree with the take that some meta-narratives are truer than other meta-narratives, because that would just kind of derail everything that postmodernism has ever done. Right? Like, one of the broader themes of postmodernism is that there is no one true meta-narrative, right? Like, I don't know if you're ever going to see them ever saying, oh, well, there's some that are more true than others. Like, that's definitely not a take that's ever happened.
Yeah,
but
I agree with postmodernism.
Of course,
arguing against that view.
Yeah, but like, why the hell would you say that Judeo-Christianity is somehow more true than other Christianities? Like, how does the meta narrative become more true? Please, I would love to hear that part.
Yeah.
Postmodernism is wrong essentially by rejecting meta narratives, and the reason for this is because the essential canon of the Judeo-Christian metaphysical substrate is respect for divinity of the individual, the idea that the individual is created in the image of God. Reproduction,
okay, so,
which is an essential.
Sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you simply because it is important that you actually answer that question. You're saying why postmodernism is wrong. You are asked why your view is correct. Why is it true that the Judeo-Christian? No, you're not. Start with the question you were asked, please.
I am. I'm telling you, the Judeo-Christian meta-narrative says, for example, reproduction is a virtue. Well, clearly that's beneficial to cultural society.
Okay. Again, it doesn't always say reproduction is a virtue. It's not a thing. I would love for you to find in the Bible where it says that all people on all earth should be able to reproduce. No, it's God's chosen people. First of all, it's a specific race. Let's start with that first off. But again, we're talking about just a lot of things here. Just because one religious idea, one ideology says a thing is good and you agree with that, doesn't mean it makes it more like true than other people's ideologies. That's just not how ideologies work, right? Like, you can't just say, oh, the Western Christianity is actually super dope, you guys, because it has some things that I think are awesome. Like, that's not a good argument.
You're not letting me finish, so please.
Okay. No, we're not going to
you have to make a good argument.
So here, I think that I might go ahead and moderate here. We have another caller I'd love to get to, and we have some other things. But so I'm gonna drop here because we've descended into bickering, which is not a good use of our time. And so I think that really quick, I'm gonna mention this system that it feels like we're following, which is blank is good. Meta-narrative says blank is good, and so it is correct. That is really tough because you have to actually give an example of what is good or what is you have to define that somehow. That's a really tough thing to define globally. It's a really tough thing to define at all. I think in this conversation, we got really lost in jargon at the beginning. I would say this is one of those instances where maybe it would be beneficial for the caller, if you're still listening, I'm sorry if you're frustrated, to restate things in your own argument as succinctly as possible. because I think that would maybe help in making some of these points. We're kind of in a strange place here where it was frustrating, to be honest, to get to the meat of what we were trying to say. And I feel like we were trying. I think that they were trying for the most part. And yet with all of the kind of jargon, like, let's say at fifth grade level, guys, you know?
The fact, oh God, there's so much wrong with this. This is, I'm sorry, I'm going to say this and it's going to trigger some people. This is what happens when you let people like Jordan Peterson take over your thought process in your life. You come to really dumb conclusions by really throwing out a lot of words and thinking that you're the smartest kid in the room, okay?
Mhm.
Judeo-Christianity is not a thing. That's a thing that's made up, okay? There's no through line between Judaism and Christianity unless what the Christians say it is, okay? And just because you think that that's really awesome and it's really cool and everybody else should follow the way that I do things doesn't mean that it's more true than other things. This is just a really complicated argument for essentially what asserts to fascism, right? This idea that, look, we have to follow these moral codes and these principles because not only do I think this is true, but this is actually metaphysically true. This is actually what makes up encompasses our reality, what makes up Western civilization. And if we don't follow through with this could collapse our civilization. This could make us lose what we have in our society, right? So like, yeah, you might view that as extreme, but this is essentially what this comes to. This is the reason why folks get interested in this stuff. They think that there is this idea of the West versus the rest of the world, and then we have to protect the West and all of its values, even though they're inconsistent and some of them aren't great, and it changes all the time. And who is a part of the West and not part of the West is going to be a constant and a debate with no end. But this is what happens. Like, this is what this community gets to. And I guarantee you, Sophia, we're going to get the Jordan Peterson stands in the comments telling us how we're all wrong. We're taking things out of context. But I've read Nietzsche and I've read Sartre and I've read Foucault, and I disagree with a lot of the premises here. I don't think you can get to these kinds of arguments.